draft the talented quarterback because it was history. Here's the quote. Someone will take him in the first round, but how could you even let that guy in the building? The second law of thermodynamics basically is the more ways something can happen, the more likely it is to happen. That's true of players. The more ways they can expletive up, the more chances they expletive up. This guy's got a lot of stuff that could lean him more likely to be a bust than a good player. Our Todd McShay says Winston still is the #1 choice on his draft board. Mariota obviously had a strong showing during the combine, leaving some to believe that they could pick Mariota #1. Still fluid situation, though, Skip Bayless. So let's talk about Jameis, focus in on him. Do you believe that he will still be the #1 pick?
I do. I was also surprised, Stephen A., that our Chris Mortensen and Bill Polian both said that they are leaning toward Mariota going as the #1 overall pick. For the record, yes, this is just me. I don't know which way the Tampa Bay will go. I just know I would take Jameis Winston #1 overall. And on balance to the quote that Kerry just read, and remember, before these drafts, a lot of scouts are going to say a lot of things. We've heard it in the past about every big-name quarterback that comes along. But on balance, reportedly, over the weekend, many teams raved about what I have been raving about Jameis Winston all year long. High football IQ. Todd McShay said that several teams were even talking about Jameis was as good as Peyton Manning was before his draft, before he got drafted, in talking X's and O's and whiteboarding, or in Peyton's case, chalkboarding X's and O's before his draft back in '98. So my point is, some scouts, Stephen A., are going to dig in on the character issues and just never buy into Jameis Winston. This is one of them. And again, this quote was in a piece by Bob McGinn, who's the extraordinary and long-tenured columnist at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. And it was part of a balanced piece about the pros and cons of a lot of different quarterbacks. But a lot of these scouts are going to dig in because Jameis brought this on himself. Obviously, his track record would scream to you he could be a high character risk. I get that, and I've said to you many times on this show, I don't know for sure, but I would go ahead, I might close one eye, and I would go with Jameis Winston. Now, those scouts are also jumping to the conclusion over the weekend. They're jumping on the fact that Mariota blew away Jameis in all the athlete competitions at the Combine. Do I put a lot of stock in him? I do not, because Peyton Manning probably didn't do very well in these competitions either. But as far as the 40-yard dash goes, as far as the jumping, the long jumping or the high jumping, Mariota is a much better athlete than Jameis Winston. Some of the scouts were jumping on the fact that Jameis can look a little bit slow-footed on his dropbacks and a little slow on his release. Doesn't bother me a bit. Jameis is by far the more accurate passer. And how many times did we see Jameis Winston in the clutch be deadly accurate when it mattered the most? I'm going to take the tape to the bank of what I saw over 2 years. I know he threw too many interceptions this year, but that first year, the Heisman year, when he goes 40 to 10 interceptions, was extraordinary to me. And finally, Jameis Winston has the it factor that I'm not sure Mariota has. And I think a lot of teams are starting to gravitate that way because he has the more charismatic personality. I think football players will follow Jameis Winston a little quicker than they will follow a Mariota who might be a little too nice and a little too quiet for his own good as far as commanding a huddle or commanding a locker room. I'm going with Jameis. So I expect to hear more of these very harsh, dismissive quotes because, again, Jameis brought that on himself. But in the end, I'm still taking Jameis Winston.
So am I, Skip Bayless. To me, it's a no-brainer because when I think about, the accuracy difference between Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, I mean, to me, what I saw, I just saw a bigger talent than Jameis Winston, somebody more equipped for the NFL level. Having said all of that, in no way do I mean to knock Marcus Mariota. I think he's gifted. I think he's talented. I think he's got a chance to be a bright young star in the NFL. He obviously is high character. That matters. In the case of Bill Polian and Chris Mortensen for ESPN, if they are of of the mindset that you go with Mariota over Winston because of character issues, no one can dispute that. You can't argue with that because in the days, in the aftermath of the Johnny Manziel, the Josh Gordons and others, listen, guys have a reason to be fearful of individuals who may not know how to act right. And if you have a question mark and you have that high of a pick, you want to go with the closest thing to a sure thing that you can find. So I understand that thinking. It's just that I think that Jameis Winston is a big time talent. Obviously with the sexual assault allegations, shoving that aside, I think that the other issues are not big issues. I think that once you go into a grown man's game, you're going to have to act like a man because you're going to have to be a leader of men. And I have faith in Jameis Winston that he'll be able to do that. I don't care about his lack of athleticism. Don't tell me Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, or Drew Brees were the most athletic dudes in the world. But boy, could they stand behind center and fling that football and run an offense. And I look at Jameis Winston from that perspective. And to me, I don't care about the long jump. I don't care about the broad jump. This ain't basketball. We're not asking them to dunk, for crying out loud. I don't care how high a quarterback jumps. All right. The speed, the running a 4.97 or a 4.99 in the 40 like Jameis Winston did, obviously that's not impressive, particularly considering the fact that some 307-pound guy from a Division III school almost ran as fast as you did. But again, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, those guys don't run too fast either. So I look at it from the perspective it comes down to how you throw the football and what level of ability do you have to galvanize troops and be a leader of men in the trenches when it's on the line. I'm not talking about during the week when you're going out to dinner together or eating breakfast together, or Thanksgiving and Christmas comes around and you eat dinner or exchanging presents with one another. I'm talking about in the trenches, in a football game, when you are going up against men. What do you stand for, and can you handle that? I don't know about Mariota. I believe I know about Jameis Winston. I'm rolling with him with the #1 overall pick, and I'm not thinking twice about it.
And yet, Stephen A., the more I've lauded Jameis's high football IQ, obviously that gets overshadowed by the not-so-smart decisions he has made off the field. So I think that's gotten pushed clear back into a corner that a lot of people are not looking into that corner.
Well, that's true. And again, and when I say put the sexual assault allegation aside, what I'm saying is because the case was ultimately dropped. If that man was guilty of such a thing, he should be in jail. He should be going to the NFL. I want to make that clear. But if that's shoved aside and all we're talking about is the BB gun incident and the supermarket ordeal and stuff like that, I think when you're a grown man making millions and you're at risk of losing millions because of your behavior, that's entirely different than risking losing a scholarship or getting suspended for games or whatever the case may be. Now you're talking about costing yourself millions of dollars. The other thing that I would say is an impediment for Jameis Winston, Skip, is the very thing that you applaud and so others have applauded. High football IQ. Let me tell you how that could be a detriment. It's one thing to be very, very smart. It's another thing entirely to know it. When you know it, it's hard sometimes for people to teach you because you think you know already. And I'm hoping that that doesn't happen to Jameis Winston, because being on the sideline arguing with Jimbo Fisher, you can't do that with Lovie Smith or anybody else on the pro level. That ain't going to fly.
I hear you, and that's a really good point. So finally, last thing that got reported is that as Jameis weighed in, obviously a lot of controversy about that picture that got posted of 6 weeks back when the bungee cord was around Jameis's waist and it looked like he had a little bit of a stomach. Okay, so he gets up to weigh, I guess it was Friday, and he weighs 231, which was about 19 pounds fewer than a lot of people thought he weighed 6 weeks ago. And reportedly, Jameis smirked and shook his head. Like,
I told you.
And some scouts said, oh, there he is. He's full of himself. He can
but
okay.
That's not right,
but
though.
he can't do anything. He can't do anything.
I agree,
now.
but any little, I'm trying to tell you what microscope is on this young man right now.
Yeah, you're right.
That can be perceived as a negative.
But we have to call those executives out generically, because wait a minute, you can't insult the guy or throw stuff out there about him being out of shape, and then he proves that that's
he's not out of shape,
and he's like, yo, see,
you know,
I
told you I was out of shape.
Oh, well, look at him. Well, why were you talking about it?
It's interesting. I told you guys this. I saw him briefly during the Super Bowl, and he was not out of shape at all. So he didn't look. So I understand. I get the smirk.
Well, we'll trust your thoughts on that, Kevin.
Yeah, he was not out of shape. That's the lady speaking. Yeah. Coming up next, we're talking about Mayweather and Manning. It's going to be a huge weekend. Stephen A. doesn't want anyone to bother him from, what is that, May 1st to the 3rd?
Mm-hmm. That's Friday to the Sunday.
Okay.
Don't bother me.
Don't bother him.
Leave me alone.
Because we might not be able to find you on Sunday.
And we won't be able to find him on Sunday, so says Skip. He'll be hiding. The fight in Vegas. We discussed. Oh, look at him. Okay. All right, Mayweather. We'll be right